In 2016, the United Kingdom shocked the world by a narrow margin, 52% to 48%. Britons voted to leave the European Union, a decision driven by national sovereignty, anti-immigration sentiment, economic frustrations, and a populist wave that swept across Europe and the United States. The term Brexit quickly became a global buzzword. For some, it represented liberation. For others, it felt like a national tragedy. Either way, the vote marked a defining moment in modern British history. But nearly a decade later, something strange is happening. The tide is turning. In 2024, a poll conducted by YouGov showed that 60% of Britons now believe Brexit was a mistake, with only 32% still defending it. More notably, younger generations, who will soon make up the majority of the electorate, overwhelmingly favour rejoining the EU. The question is no longer whether Brexit was a mistake. It's whether the UK will one day undo it. So what changed? Why is support for rejoining the EU growing so rapidly? Is it economic, cultural, political? Or is there something deeper, something more existential driving this reversal? This is the real reason the UK wants to rejoin the EU. When the Leave campaign launched, it promised three key things: more money for the NHS, fewer immigrants, and greater sovereignty. It's now clear that none of these materialised the way voters expected. Take the NHS, the UK's beloved public health system. One of the most infamous campaign claims was that leaving the EU would free up £350 million a week for the NHS. But after Brexit, NHS funding didn't see a significant Brexit-driven boost. Instead, the NHS is now facing record wait times, chronic staff shortages, and a funding crisis. The extra money never appeared because it was never really there. Immigration was another hot-button issue. The Leave campaign promised to take back control of borders, and while freedom of movement with the EU ended, net migration into the UK actually increased. In 2022, the UK saw net migration surpass 600,000, the highest on record. Most of this came from non-EU countries. Brexit didn't reduce immigration, it just changed where immigrants came from. As for sovereignty, technically, the UK regained full legislative and regulatory control. But in practice, it still has to align with EU rules if it wants access to the European market without having any say in how those rules are made. It's sovereignty in name only. Brexit didn't deliver on its core promises, and voters are waking up to that.
One of the clearest and most measurable impacts of Brexit has been economic. Multiple studies now show that the UK economy has shrunk by 4 to 5% relative to where it would have been had the country remained in the EU. That's tens of billions of pounds in lost GDP every year. Trade has fallen, investment has declined, and businesses, especially small exporters, are struggling with red tape. In 2023, the UK became the only G7 economy to contract in real terms. Food prices are up. Manufacturing is down. London's financial dominance is fading as firms shift jobs to Frankfurt, Amsterdam, and Paris. The British pound remains weak. Inflation has hit double digits. All of this has fueled a growing perception that Brexit made the UK poorer, and not just at the national level, but for ordinary people. Job seekers face fewer opportunities. Students lost access to EU scholarships and exchange programs like Erasmus. Musicians and artists now need costly visas to tour Europe. Farmers and fishermen, to groups that overwhelmingly supported Brexit, are struggling to survive under new rules. In the end, voters expected a windfall. What they got was a slowdown. Before Brexit, the UK was often seen as the bridge between Europe and the United States, a diplomatic powerhouse with cultural, economic, and military reach. But post-Brexit, Britain's global standing has taken a hit. Inside the EU, the UK was one of the big three, alongside Germany and France. It shaped policy, brokered deals, and projected influence across the continent. Outside of it, it's now just another medium-sized power trying to negotiate trade deals from a position of weakness. The US no longer sees Britain as the gateway to Europe, And while London once attracted startups and global investors thanks to easy EU access, many of those incentives are gone. Britain has become more isolated politically, economically, and diplomatically. Even inside the UK, Brexit has reignited tensions between its nations. Scotland is again pushing for independence. Northern Ireland faces political instability over its border arrangements. Britain's power has diminished, and voters feel it. Here's the truth: Brexit was largely a generational vote. Polling data from 2016 showed that the older the voter, the more likely they were to support Leave. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, nearly three-quarters voted Remain. Among those 65 and older, the majority voted Leave. Fast forward to today, and that age gap is rewriting the political landscape. Millions of pro-Brexit voters have aged out of the electorate. At the same time, millions of young, pro-EU Britons have reached voting age. These new voters see Europe not as a threat, but as a natural extension of their identity. They travel, study, and work across borders. They are more socially liberal, globally connected, and politically. This demographic shift is slowly but steadily changing public opinion, and it's only accelerating. The longer time passes, the more rejoining the EU becomes not a matter of if, but when. When Boris Johnson led the Conservatives to a landslide victory in 2019, Brexit was the rallying cry. Get Brexit done was the slogan, and for a moment, it worked. But by 2024, the mood has changed. The Conservative Party is now deeply divided. Boris Johnson is gone. Rishi Sunak struggles with credibility. Scandals, infighting, and broken promises have eroded trust. Meanwhile, the Labour Party under Keir Starmer has carefully shifted its position. While still hesitant to call for rejoining outright, Labour now supports closer ties with the EU, perhaps a new customs union or single market access. The Liberal Democrats, the SNP, and the Greens all openly support rejoining. And in the background, a quiet but growing rejoin movement is building momentum. For now, full EU membership isn't on the ballot, but the idea is no longer taboo. It's part of the national conversation again. Beyond economics and politics, Brexit triggered something deeper, an identity crisis. For decades, Britain walked a delicate line between its European and Atlantic identities. It was British but also European. That duality shaped everything from its cuisine to its universities to its foreign policy. Brexit shattered that balance. Suddenly, Britons had to choose, and many felt like something was being taken away. Freedom of movement wasn't just about labor markets. It was about a sense of belonging, of being able to live, love, and work across 27 countries without barriers. Losing that felt like a cultural amputation, especially for young people. Brexit also forced Britons to confront uncomfortable truths about empire, race, class, and nationalism. It reopened old wounds, and it raised new questions about who gets to define Britishness in the 21st century. Now, a growing number of people want that European connection back, not just for economic reasons, but for emotional and cultural ones. They want to feel part of something bigger again. While the UK has changed since Brexit, so has the EU. The union that Britain left in 2020 is not the same one that exists today. It has weathered a pandemic, navigated an energy crisis, and responded to war in Ukraine. It has expanded its defense policy, invested in green technologies, and reformed key institutions. In many ways, the EU is now more united, more pragmatic, and more popular, especially among younger Europeans. Rejoining today wouldn't be a return to the past. It would be a leap into a new version of Europe, one that's more flexible and potentially more welcoming. And the EU, for all its flaws, might be open to it.
It's the million-pound question, and the answer is complicated. There is no immediate plan to rejoin. The process would be long, politically fraught, and potentially controversial. The EU would likely demand commitments to the euro, to Schengen, and to alignment on laws. But public opinion is shifting. Politicians are testing the waters. and the memory of Brexit is becoming less about pride and more about regret. If the trend continues, the UK could within a decade begin serious negotiations, starting perhaps with rejoining the single market or customs union and then moving toward full membership. It wouldn't be easy, but it's no longer unthinkable. Brexit was sold as a way to take back control. But in the years since, Britain has lost control of its narrative, its economy, and perhaps even its identity. The real reason the UK wants to rejoin the EU isn't just about GDP or immigration. It's about belonging. It's about the future. It's about the next generation wanting a country that is open, collaborative, and globally connected. The UK may have left Europe, but Europe never really left the UK. And as the dust of Brexit continues to settle, one thing is becoming clear: the door to Brussels may not be shut forever. And for a growing number of Britons, it's a door they're now ready to reopen.